that was brought into the Fort Worth area. You had all those statistics on the money that was brought into the Fort Worth area.
Right.
I'd like to know exactly how much of that money stayed in the corporations and how much the big executives got as opposed to how much the people living in the area got. I really think that those numbers have to be expanded by, the corporation made this much money, but we all know that when corporations make this money, it doesn't go to the people. So I was wondering how much of this money actually goes to the people.
Well, the economic uplift was based upon not just the people directly in the natural gas industry, but the outflow of all that money generated by the natural gas industry was affecting all of the people in the population. Now, there is a table that I could show you that is the basis for the Perryman study, and it will show you all of the various facets of this.
So to show me how many billions the gas company took and how many hundreds of thousands the people got, and
it'll show everything in terms of the total economy. And if you would like, I will get a copy of that for you and get that table for you, because I know from your question you'd find that very interesting.
Okay.
I'll do that.
I have a second part.
Okay.
For you, Julie. The film that you showed, it talked about people shutting down the industries on the Hudson River. Well, I happen to have grown up on the Hudson River, and 30 years ago when I left New Jersey, you could not touch the Hudson River. It was too polluted. You could not eat the food coming out of it. You couldn't anything. If you touched it, you'd be polluted. Now they put in, the environmentalists have put in a lot of actions, and I'll tell you, my cousins are eating mussels out of the Long Island Sound, which wasn't possible to do when I was a kid. People, friends of mine, take their children fishing in the Hudson, and they eat the fish coming out of that river. You could not do that 30 years ago.
Yes, I would say that's true in many places.
My parents told me, don't touch the water.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with facets of the environmental movement. Have been wonderful. You know?
Right, so, I mean, this is what, your film was against taking away this industry. Well, not all industries are good for people.
Well, they're not all bad either, which it seems to me you're trying to make that as a point. So I think that...
No, you're making a point that, industry's good because it brings money, but it doesn't, your point didn't say what it does to people's lives.
Well, it employs people, doesn't it? And it gives them
No.
jobs and opportunities. I mean, this country is based on capitalism. This is the wealthiest nation in the world because of the free enterprise and capitalism.
You're not the wealthiest nation in the world.
You can make
Have you been
industry out
to
of
Mississippi?
villain. If you want to villainize industry, you can do that. I'm not working for industry. And I'm not
I
defending...
know, you want to make money off
I'm
your
not
land.
defending...
My land value has doubled since the year that I bought it, but I really don't know. Land doesn't double in a year without a bubble. I'm sorry.
I'm not defending pollution either. So, I believe that environmental regulations are important and they have
I don't think a drill can be safety belt. No, I don't think so. Anyway.
Does anybody else have any other questions? Sir?
This is for the professor. You mentioned earlier that you were concerned about contamination of the drinking water from hydrofracturing. Could you please describe how that will happen?
There's many ways out of it. Basically, you've seen that it's all depending on the concrete things and the concrete well structures, and unfortunately, a lot of the wells in the Pennsylvania area and our area don't have these concrete things that they should, but you're exploiting things, you've got all this stuff coming up, and all you should do is migrate from your well thing into the aquifer. It's not a big mystery how to get there.
That's a very poor explanation. I'm sorry.
I'm not a chemist.
Well, Doug,
You made an assertion that it was going to happen.
It's a risk that I don't think is really worth taking.
I saw a presentation by Dr. Tony Graffia, and he was talking about this. The concrete degrades over time, the well casing degrades over time, and what happens is even after the well is spent, there are possibility that there could be leaks when they frack, but what happens is pressure, even after they cap the well, the toxins, the chemicals underground, they stay there, a lot of them. So after time, the gas builds back up after the well is spent, and according to Dr. Graffia, this pressure pushes the chemicals back up after the well casings are rusted leaking, degraded, and decades down the road, we're going to be having contamination issues.
And you're assuming that, you know, when you're building thousands of these things, that they're all going to be perfectly safe.
Yeah, this is an industrial process. New York is beautiful. If you compare us to like the Midwest, where it's all flat, or desert areas, this is at least one area I think we need to protect and set it aside. At least Pennsylvania should have done the same thing, I think, but at least New York, where you have these beautiful Finger Lakes and
Is that a question?
single source aquifers.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You know
Please.
that Rafia's study has been questioned by his own people at the university. They've done, he and this guy Haworth, I guess, they did a study together, and people in the university did another study and went into the factual side of the situation, and they found that he was not using facts. In other words, the facts aren't there to back up what he's saying. For example, your assessment of this, that these frac jobs leaving a residual in the formation will then come back up. There's no back to
But
that.
he's a geologist. He's been studying this all his life. Why wouldn't he realize that the gas goes back up? and it would push
Because
these
we've been doing
toxins
this,
back up?
we've been doing this in the industry for years and years, and there's no case of this ever having happened. It's just, there isn't a case. And if you don't have the
There are
fact,
documented cases that say
I
we
can
did
assert all kinds of things, that this could happen or that could happen. But you have to have facts. You have to have some kind of scientific evidence of these things. Just going out
What about-
as Gracia did and making these statements, it is not valid unless you have something to back it up.
What about all the...
That's it,
There's
sir.
so much
Enough.
pollution in the river
Sir,
in
please.
Pennsylvania.
Ma'am.
Okay, this is for Maureen and Dr. Christensen. I'm just wondering, you claim that gas development is a high impact land use. Now, when you're done with the gas well, the rigs that you see there are for 3 weeks or a month to drill the well, and then they go away, and then grass is grown back in, reseeded. You've got a Christmas tree, which looks like a big fire hydrant, usually painted green, that you really have to look for in the landscape. Okay, if a property owner doesn't have the right to access their resource of natural gas that they own and they pay taxes on, and the other alternative might be to take some of that land that's pasture land or woodland right now and divide it up into subdivision of spaghetti lots and sell it to have trailers or McMansions built, which requires pavement and the water will run off from any paved areas. Then you'll get strip malls eventually. So when you talk about land use, I'm wondering how you can say that a temporary 30-year possibly wellhead in the middle of a field is industrial when housing, once the land is used for housing, it will always be housing. And once there's a strip mall there, it will always be pavement. And if you've ever been to Vestal Parkway after a rainstorm and you've got to slog through the water because of all the pavement out here that won't even make its way down the storm sewer. I'd like to understand the concept.
What's your question exactly?
I would like to understand the concept of why you think it's heavy industrial. I can't see it.
Because of the cases that we brought up that were documented by DEC, the EPA, these are water contamination cases, that's why we brought them up. And it is short term because, like I said earlier from the Federal Energy Information Agency, the U.S. we only have 4% of the world's natural gas. It's not as big of a thing as you'd like to think. Like, yeah, we have large amounts, but that's only enough, what I just said, that's only enough to last us 11 years.
Did you do a
Is
lot
that
of
long term?
studying?
No.
Did you do a lot of studying before this presentation?
Well,
It sounds like you picked some
I'm trying to give you the
quotes.
facts, that's why I'm giving it to you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more to learn. And the EPA, did you know that Lisa Jackson, the head of the EPA, is quoted as saying there's never been one proven case of contamination of drinking water anywhere ever? from hydraulic fracturing?
That's correct. She affirmed that herself, Lisa Jackson did, before the Congressional Committee.
Okay, we're gonna have time for, I don't want to keep you guys here ever, so, we're gonna take 2 more questions. I know you had your hand up, sir, and then ma'am, last comments, questions, make them short and concise, please.
I'd like to ask a question about the hydraulic fracturing. In Jamestown, New York, since 1940, over 7,000 wells have been drilled through the water aquifer. Those are all vertical wells, they're not horizontal. Now, it's my understanding that the perennial bedrock that flows along the 2 miles that they drill vertically cannot be permeated, and you would have to change the laws of physics to get anything to go up through that bedrock. So the only place it could come up is through the vertical well section. So with less wells being drilled, because we now can drill 2 miles, wouldn't it be smarter to do the horizontal fracking? Because instead of having 1 well pad every acre, we now have 1 well pad every 2 miles. And I understand the DEC might make that every 4 miles by putting the well pad in the middle of a 640 acre unit and now doing 1,280 acres. So what is your answer to that, reply to that?
So that is an excellent point. A very, very good point. If you take a square mile, that's 640 acres. And if you're drilling vertical wells in the state of New York, you can have 1 well on every 40 acres. So this, compared with 4 wells with horizontal drilling, can exploit that whole 640 acres. So obviously, the most prudent thing to do is to drill with horizontal wells in these long laterals. That is an advantage in a lot of ways. It's an advantage to the operator because he's going to make more money with less investment. It's going to be an advantage on the surface because they're not going to be all that number of wellheads. And speaking of that, there are a lot of movements now that when these people in Pennsylvania and elsewhere finish drilling these wells, they're planting vegetation around, so you're not even going to see the Christmas tree. So that is a real advantage. But back to your point, obviously the thing to do is to drill the horizontal wells because then you don't have you're going to have less traffic going in and out, and all of that sort of, all the things that environmentalists have been complaining about are really helped by drilling horizontal wells. Okay.
Thank you.
One thing the video didn't show much of was storage ponds, and that's, I'm very concerned about.
I understand in New York there is no storage ponds except for clean water storage for the purpose of hydrofracking itself. There are no more flowback pits in New York. It's all closed loop. And they're also requiring 100% recycling of the water. Julie Lewis went to TARM Industries, I know, because I drove her there. And one thing that Julie forgot to mention is that TARM Industries had a spill, 1,000 gallons of frac fluid spilled out of an overflow tank. And they were fined $18,000 by the DEP. Only 250 gallons of that made it to the Susquehanna River. And 250 gallons of that made it to the Susquehanna River. And working with the DEP, this is a brand new industry. TARM is a brand new industry. They have now treated over 200 million gallons with absolutely no problem. And they mitigated the problem with the overflow by putting in sensors that will shut down all plumbing, all unloading of frac water if a tank is considered to be too full to accept.
Thank you. And finally, our last question. I'm sorry that I was not able to get to everybody, but yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I know that there's, gas wells all over New York State. Many of them we don't even know where they are. So as we begin to start drilling and things, we could have a lot of problems, with this process like that. As also, there has been vertical well drilling contamination. If you go to www.toxicstargeting.com and look at the Marcellus Shale, they have data from the health department and the DEC and all that in there regarding families that have been totally contaminated. There's one family that hasn't been able to drink their well water for 4.5 years, but that's out in western New York. It's not Dimock, Pennsylvania. it's in New York State. So just, keep getting your facts together and all that.
Is there a question?
It's really important.
Okay, and that is the conclusion of the debate.
Thank you very much for coming, everybody.